So let's do a couple drawings from these reference images that we have of portraits. Now I want to start with these still being relatively quick because if we give ourselves too much time, then we'll become overwhelmed with all the details of the features. So shorter poses, just focusing on proportion and shadow shapes and simplification and planes. Those are really the first things we have to get right before we can really start placing all of the important details. So let's start here. Again, just like anything else, we're going to start with a kind of gestural more gestural quality here. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say this has to be kind of the top of the head just because of our page. Alright, so you see we have this really basic box here. Shoulder. Other shoulders up there. And we can think a little bit about our hair. And again, I'm just breaking this down into big shapes first. Okay, first saying this is hair, then this is kind of going to be our hairline. I'm going to just do a quick measurement on these thirds here. Alright, so the head is tipped up at us a little bit, right? So we can see more of this kind of underplane. Of the chin here, which is indicating that this lower third, so if we break this down into thirds, this lower third is going to be a little bit bigger just because of foreshortening, because of our perspective. So thinking about our brow line here, and then thinking about our kind of central axis here. This one's pretty much straight up and down from what I'm seeing. Okay, so boom, boom. We'll call the bottom of the nose there. Chin, I'm going to bring that down a little bit just to give us that little additional space here. So third, that one's a little bit bigger. So that should work. Okay, next thing, I'm going to go straight into this now. Kind of start to look for, use our angle measurements. So our jaws are kind of lining up on this same basic kind of grid that we're locking everything into. Top of the nose, so this right with our third from the brow ridge down to the nose, this is to the base of the nose, so the actual tip of the nose is up here because we're seeing a decent amount of the underplane of the nose. Once you get to a spot like this, where you have some really basic things kind of laid in. I'm going to add just a little more volume over here. Indicating this ear. The ear's lining up pretty well with the jaw. She has these like gauges, and I'm seeing those line up pretty decently with the kind of our jaw, the angle change of our jaw, close to it at least. Okay, so once I have these kind of simple, really basic components in, I want to think about, typically at this stage I'm going to start with a feature and start to build that out. So it's kind of like I block in the external stuff and then I grab something more in the center. I like to start with the nose and build out from there. So building out from the nose might indicate that some of this external stuff has to change, but because it's so simple, because it's very much just a first pass at that, that's not a huge issue for me. So we'll start with the nose here. I want to find the kind of side where the kind of corners of the nose is. This I'm just thinking kind of based off this central axis, how much distance is there here and here. So I'm going to think about the ball of the nose. The nose is one of those things that you really need to observe carefully and not fall into drawing what we know. It's all about drawing what we see. So I'm kind of mapping out the nostrils a little bit here. I know this doesn't make a ton of sense yet, but you really have to kind of stick with this process and trust yourself. So making sure that these corners are still lining up. This is the important part, this angle, making sure that this tilt always is preserved throughout all of the kind of fleshing out of the features. Okay, I'm going to come straight into our shadow shapes here. A little bit of a shadow on this nostril. Okay, general shadow shapes here. The nose. This kind of shadow helps define the side plane here. the nose, like any other part of the body, has a lot of, if you kind of draw through places, you'll start to be able to connect. For instance, kind of the angle of this far nostril, if you draw through that, you will line up here pretty well with the kind of right side of the keystone of the nose. So this is getting our brow ridge. Okay, now let's bring this up. I want to just get a hint of the eye here. Again, with these kind of shorter poses, and I'm intentionally making our poses too short to get too far with this information. But so I'm using this basic kind of up from the side of the nostril to find the tear duct, but that's all, of course, in relation to our tilt of the head. And then I will cross-check with triangulation, so from the far nostril up here to find how high up that is. I'm saying that right around there. Same on this side, which means this brow is going to come up. Now I'm getting a general sense of that shape, but I'm not too worried about that right now. Again, I want to just, I'm just trying to get these measurements. So top of the lips here, again, because we have this kind of thing happening like this, so if I put this on a cylinder now, the cylinder is going to be a little bit more obvious. I don't know why I made it off to the side there. So brow ridge. Now if we think about the mouth, that same thing is going to happen. So the top of the lip is here, and the actual corners of the mouth, they're going to show up a little bit lower because it's wrapping around this space. Corner is right around here, and right around here. I'll make sure that these corners then are on this same grid, so I'm constantly, most important thing is making sure everything is on this grid. Roughly there, we're going to put the mouth is kind of open here and lower lip there-ish. Now tracking that down, so this is where the chin starts, and the ball of the chin begins. And now from here we can actually decently start to map out some main shadow shapes. overshot that. The you know, I'm thinking about the width of the lips compared to the width of this shadow. So I'm going to bring that up to about there. Okay, so and the reason I'm doing this shadow mapping is getting these shadows right is going to actually give me a pretty solid sense of the kind of the gesture of the figure, of the portrait here. Or in other words, it's going to give me the big picture information, and it will actually read like the portrait with very minimal effort. So I'm thinking about the distance from this shadow to the shadow on the cheek. Thinking about that angle. Now this shadow is quite a bit harder than this shadow. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm mapping the shadow out. But now we get up here to where the eye is starting to cast a shadow into the cheekbone. Let's find that. Let's pinpoint that location. Right around here. I'm using, you know, the center of the nose where it inserts into the face, into the lips and the muzzle is kind of my key point that I'm spreading this whole drawing from. So this is my central kind of anchor point to check to. Double check that. It's right in this area. Now what that is showing me here more on the form side is this is kind of the height of our cheekbone. So on the form side it kind of does this, and then up like that. Okay, now there's a little bit of a sense of this. Here, I'm going to actually try to lay this in relatively quickly. Is the kind of cast shadow of our jaw here. Oops, that's getting offhand. Okay. So I have that component. Now I'm going to come over here to still just tracking shadow information, so I'm not even really thinking about the eye. I'm going to kind of draw the eye. I'm going to draw this eye by actually drawing, just indicating it by, or at least my first step into kind of working on the features here is mapping out the shadow information around the eye. So thinking about this. Again, less is more. You really want to let the features in the portrait kind of emerge over time through subtle refinement, through big picture block and refinement stuff. So now there's, I'm going to kind of try to track this hair shape a little bit here. Okay, let's mask this shadow in. I'm going to just indicate here the kind of thickness of the eye to get that started. Okay, and then we'll just kind of track down the corners of the outside of the eye. So within the shadow side, it's kind of a non-event. I'm going to indicate something, and then I'm going to check that with this width. I think it needs to come in just a little bit. And then on this side, I will again, the outside corners of the eye are being obscured by either kind of lost in shadow or I guess it's lost in shadow on this side too, but because of this hair that's coming over it. But as long as the inner eyes land on the same, so I'm going to now check the angle of each eye in particular. So this is an important thing that I touched on. Is the corner of the inside of the eye is not necessarily on the same grid as the corner of the outside of the eye. So as long as the outside to outside is on the grid, and as long as the inside to inside is on the grid, these corners don't have to be on that same grid, if that makes sense. I'm going to think a little bit about this shadow shape, especially as it falls over the cheek. And then shadow of the nose. We can look a little bit into, let's see, so this is going to be a 20-minute drawing, so got about 5 minutes left here. So let's go to try to refine. First, let me just bring this nose back. So let's think about what's happening here at the corner of the mouth. So, you know, a lot of this just comes down to careful observation. thinking about those three kind of planes of the lips here, or the three kind of volumes of our lips. Now within the lips there are some shadows happening. Lower lip, let's see, let's find this gap here first. Yeah, so again with the lower lip we have kind of these two pillows on the outside. The lower lip is kind of just barely obscuring the upper lip in the corners. Together right around there, and finding the other one. Okay, so this lip has a slight shadow shape on it too. One of the important things that I want to mention with this, with any portrait, but that is becoming obvious in this case, is it's coming down to planes, understanding our planes and our shadow shapes and our volumes, and it's not rushing too quickly into placing anything. So all of this is still like very rough and loosely based. You see I haven't really refined any harder edges. I'm still just kind of finding and placing these things as I go. So don't rush into this stuff, especially with the portrait, where we've spent our whole lives staring at other people's faces, that anytime anything is just the slightest bit off, it becomes very obvious. To us, we can pick up issues very quickly. So take your time with this and just build it up slowly through shadow shapes and big picture information. Okay, so let's get into the second reference that I have here of the male model, the male portrait, kind of looking down. Now again, I'm thinking about the planes of the face and the kind of the directionality. Typically the gaze, like where the eyes are looking, is a good indication of the overall gesture of the head. So the eyes are kind of looking down, which is actually making the whole head tip, and everything's kind of looking down. But just to kind of conceptualize this, I'm going to think about this box shape. I'm going to think about this box shape as having this kind of, we'll use this as the front plane. So this is kind of like a little one. So sometimes it takes a couple a couple iterations to get all these lines to read. But this is roughly what I'm seeing for this one. So the brow ridge is there, this way, side of the face is like that. So this is nice typically if I'm doing a portrait or a head drawing that is not super clear or is like really tipped and really extreme in one way or another. Then I will do a little box conception like this just so I can wrap my mind around what I'm seeing and where those planes should land. But let's work on this down here-ish. Okay, again I want to think about this kind of front plane of the face. Just doing that-ish. It goes up like so. The extreme kind of top point of the head is going to be, we'll call it right here. This is where it's going to start to go down the other side, but that's lining up just it's lining up pretty well with the corner of the chin, the close corner of the chin here. So that's roughly kind of the outside dimensions. I like to get that in just to have a sense of it. You know, our sternocleidomastoid muscle is coming almost straight down. This is interesting. The top shoulder are kind of where we start to see the trapezius coming out of the neck. Is lining up pretty well with the corner of the jaw. So there's a little bit more neck there. Trying to find the other sternocleidomastoid muscle, and then looking kind of, if we draw this straight across, we can see that the other end of the shoulders is coming out more at an angle here. Okay, so let's think about our planes now. So with something like this, let's look at, actually, let's put this in a cylinder because I think this part will make more sense. Now thinking about our box, similar to this one, how in our box we see the underplane, if you do the cylinder version of this, you have to see the underplane. So in this case we see the top plane of the head, so we need to show and indicate more of a top plane here. And not seeing the bottom plane in this particular pose. So if we think about the eyes, or if we think about the cross contour of this, that's indicating our distances. They're going to bend down, right? They have more of this kind of a bend than in this case where it's more of this kind of a bend. So that actually is pretty apparent here with our brow ridge. It's kind of doing more of this. I'm also just drawing a line, or kind of taking a horizontal measurement for where the kind of eye sockets begin, where the brow ridge starts compared to this. So we're going to call that around here. Now I'm not locked into any of these things. They're like kind of just the shot in the dark to get in the ballpark of our shapes here, but this is where I'm really starting to anchor in my drawing. So we can see that we just see the tiniest chunk of the far side of the cheekbone. I see the nose pretty well. I'm thinking about this more in a triangulation way right here, so I'm going to box this nose in, but then I'm thinking of kind of what is the line from the brow ridge to the tip of the nose, and what is the line from the tip of the nose down through the kind of chin information. That's pretty good. So what I'm seeing is more chin than I have, but we will address that as we get going. I'm roughly thinking about like how far in the nostril goes from the edge of the lip compared to, so if we brought that lip line up, how much of the nose is here and how much of the nose is on this side. There's more on the inside kind of face side. So I'm going to bring this lip down to about here. That seems right. Just a rough estimate for the opening of the mouth between the lips to start. Thinking about, so the lips having, in this one here, it has this front plane, side plane, side plane. So that's going to be the case no matter what angle there is, but it just depends on what one we're seeing, or like what is the most prominent planes here. So in this case, this point here is really the front plane of our lips, but we're seeing a lot more of our side plane here. So this is indicating that we can see, some of this front plane of our cube here. That's reinforcing that idea, just right there, looking for those planes. Okay, so you see how I don't know if the camera is going to pick this up, but right down here I'm starting to make darker lines, and what that's telling me is that I'm unclear on this. I'm kind of speeding through this area a little bit too fast. I see that a lot with other artists also, especially people learning to draw and see these forms, is typically when they aren't sure of something, they make the lines darker. It's like counterintuitive. It's almost like trying to convince your eye that this is where it is, because once you make that line dark enough, you can't erase it out. So whenever I find myself making those dark lines, I know that I have to take a second and really think about this, double check. Now, like I said, the top of the head in this case is lining up pretty well with, this is great. So the top of the head is lining up with kind of this spot here, which is what I was going for. This is kind of where the shadow, cast shadow of the head is falling onto the chest. So that is good. But you see how my chin was dropped. So these initial lines, we don't have to be tied to them. However, if we make them too dark, then in some ways we are tied to them. So just try to keep them light. Okay, so I'm going to find this kind of corner of the jaw by pulling an angle from the eye socket. That was where we initially started our second phase of refinement here, so that's where I'm going to try to anchor everything into this space. Okay, now I'm going to use our shadow information in here. I'm going to clean this area up too, because it's a little messy right now. So here with the nose, we have to be careful because we have a bottom plane that we can see. We have to make sure that that's well represented. So I'm making this little indication for now just to say that this is around where that bottom plane is going to start. And I'm going to come back. I'm going to think about the highlight on the nose here is indicating our front plane. There's even less of this showing. Okay, trying to find. I'm just trying to map in the actual cast shadow into the eye socket. Now, within this, I'm going to track down, using the corner of the nose here, this nostril. I want to find the corner of the eye just to indicate where this is, and that's going to help me make sure that this kind of main shadow shape is heading in the right direction. So I'm going to say it's about there, but I'll cross-reference now with the inside corner of the nose. Yeah, so this point is also pointing to roughly right in there, so we're going to say that's our eye socket. Now there's a decent amount of shadow, because this kind of bridge of the nose comes through. Shadow. Now the eye itself is the inside corner of the eye. We can track up from, again, the corner of the nostril. I'm going to give it, just drop this in, but I'm not going to focus too much on it. Okay, continuing this drawing. So this is where I got in about 20 minutes. I'm going a little bit further into detail so you can see this stuff starting to become more realized. But I really think even getting here is fine. It's really the key parts that I'm finding here are brow ridge, kind of nose, chin. Here's those thirds again. Now with the receding hairline, those things they change, and also because of this tip, the forehead is closer to us, so it's going to be a little bit bigger than those proportions. But really, it's just these really rough proportions in shadow shapes, and then I'm starting to refine from there. So I'm just going to lay in the shadow shape. It's really interesting right around the temple. A very strong cheekbone kind of shadow that's happening here too. And look, this is lining up pretty well with following this same kind of angle here. So it's picking up where this one is casting. Now there's a little volume in the light here, so we have to make sure that shows up and is noted. There we go, and across this way. Now, thinking about all of the shadows that are casting here. So again, this is very shape-based, but what these, as I'm mapping this stuff out, it becomes very three-dimensional. Like this kind of shape of this particular shadow here is indicating that kind of column that's coming out of our lower lips that I briefly touched on earlier. Alright, now let's get this nose. So the lips are doing kind of this sort of thing, coming up. And in, and we can't really see the far kind of backside other pillow here of the lip, but we can see it a little bit on this side. But mostly what we see is this lip, and there's just a tiny spot of this lip that is actually catching a little bit of light, which is going to be a nice indication down here once all of this is kind of falling into shadow. So let's just map out this hair shape real fast. To do that, I might actually take a measurement. So from the kind of brow ridge up to the beginning of the hairline, what is that compared to? So that's, I'm seeing this space here from this corner up to the hairline being the same distance as this space down to the base, to the bottom of the nose. So let's grab that. Now the top kind of peak of this receding section of the hair, I'm going to try to take a plumb line from that and see where that lines up. So it's lining up right around here. This part I'm not super tied to. I'm happy to alter this kind of hair shape as I go, so I'm going to lay it in pretty light. Alright, and then the last kind of feature that I want to put in is our nose. So if we think about this more two-dimensionally and not think about how everything is wrapping around, I can find the base of the ear by taking a plumb line, or a horizontal from around here, which is an arbitrary point. But I'm just thinking how far down from the brow ridge, how far up from the nose, and then maybe I could double check that from the corner of the eye over, so that lands pretty well. Now with the ear, with the head tipped, the ear is going to be tipped forward too. So this line indicates where the ear itself kind of attaches to the side of the head. I'm just trying to relate it to anything I can right now. So I'm taking a line from here. I'm thinking about if we were to continue this arc of the kind of top part of the hair, where would that hit? Same here with the jaws, but this being the kind of corner of our jaw. In fact, our jaw is a little bit sharper corner than I had indicated. I need to look at that jaw again, actually. So something threw me off here. I'm thinking about the base of this ear compared to this corner of the jaw. This distance feels too much. So I'm double checking that angle that I took initially. I'm seeing the corner of the jaw is going to come up. There's still a roundness to this section, and then the kind of, there's a lot of muscles in here, and then the bone itself shows up right here, comes up. I might drop this ear just a little bit to split the difference and bring those things closer. Now the ear is in half light, half shadow, so there's a lot of mapping that could happen here. But I just want to show you, as now that I have this kind of shadow mapped in, for the most part, I'm going to push this nose just a little bit further so we can indicate the nostril. So the nostril is not a hole. It's not like a hole in the nose. It's not like there's kind of this, if this is the underplane of the nose, you know, and it's going away in space. If we're kind of looking at the head from directly below, you know, our mouth is here, this is the nose. It's not like our nostrils are these like holes in this plane. The like base of the nose kind of wraps around, the nostril kind of curls in. It's like this spiral that's happening, and it's coming around and it's connecting in here. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm drawing the nose, so that it doesn't show up too much, just like a kind of punched out hole. Okay, now thinking about our shadow shapes here. Okay, not even really worrying about the eye still. Let's map in some of the shadow information. And then let's, I think, probably move on to the next one. I think this is far enough for starting to get a sense of these portraits, these heads. I want to actually reconfigure this back of the head piece. It's gonna be more like that. find our neck. Alright, somewhere in there is probably where I will call it for now. Because I kind of wiped it down, I might be able to pull just the slightest highlights out. You can't even really tell, but here. Okay, so all I'm doing there is just laying in another little value. Probably get this here too. So we can pull the highlights out from the top. So there's highlight there, kind of right on the bridge of the nose, right there, following this edge of the nose down, maybe a little bit in there. So you have to be careful when you're pulling highlights out because the highlight is hardest, sharpest here, lightest here. And as we come down, the highlights look lighter because they're surrounded by these darker and darker shapes, but still the kind of light on the nose isn't anywhere near as bright as that. So there's still this kind of hierarchy happening. Let's do one more here because I want to show a profile. This one is just a pure profile, so I can't, there's front planes, but you know, it's not like in a 3/4 position or anything like that. I'll try to make this one a little bit bigger too. So I'm thinking about where the topmost part of the head is, or of our hair shape, and how that relates to how much of the back of the head, how much of the front of the head is there. There's more on the front side. We'll call it that for now. I'm going to take a measurement from kind of the forehead out to the nose, and then the nose down. So that was arbitrary, but we could maybe, if we really wanted to check, you could take a diagonal. That's actually pretty close. Or like here, so we could bring this down a little bit. So again, I'm not tied to any of these lines. Thinking about here, our jawline. Again, eyeballing this stuff first, just to give us a head shape. It's important to have a head shape pretty early on. So where do the ears line up? in relation to the highest point of our head. They're coming down, the ear, bottom of the ear is over here, the top of the ear is on the other side of this kind of border. Around there. Thinking about our neck here. I'm going to try to summarize that in one angle first. So this is a pretty extreme. I'm not sure what her posture is like, or what kind of pose. This is a cropped image, so I'm not sure what this pose is doing, but you can really see how the head might sit like this, but the neck really kind of comes out at an angle, and then our rib cage, right? So this idea is very, very prominent here. So how much space from the ear to the back of the head? A little bit more, ear to the top. So I'm trying to break this down into, angles here. I am seeing these angles. I'm not over angularing anything, I don't think. I guess I'm really hunting out the angles and ignoring more of the arcs, but I find I can get more accurate doing this than kind of saying, here's the back of the head. So it's looking like the nose to, again, I don't often take these kind of measurements, but with portraits I guess I do more frequently. So the nose to the kind of connecting point of the ear lobe, or ear body, is about the halfway point between the head, which is lines up with kind of a lot of the proportional rules with heads in portrait or in profile view like this, which is going to tell me that, and this is kind of what I'm seeing, is this head at the front of the face is going to come in a little bit. So with that kind of early block in done, I'm going to start again as I typically do on the second phase with the nose. So another thing we can think about here is finding this brow ridge. You know, this general angle to here. Now we can roughly say those are close. I'm seeing, especially with the mouth kind of open like that, that's going to extend that proportion. So I'm seeing the hairline, and it's probably partly due to the kind of hairstyle here. We can't actually see too much of the hairline. But I'm seeing both of these proportions a little bit larger than what I would guess would be the hairline somewhere up there in the hair. But let's just keep trucking here and try to place some more information. So there's not a lot of shadow shapes that we can use in this case either. So it really comes down to landmarks and corners of features. Bring that out a little bit more. If I think about the corner of the nose in relation to here. Alright, corner of the eye. Now where that corner is. Somewhere in there, inside the eye. I have to erase some stuff because I feel like some of this context is getting out of hand. So I'm going to ghost this back. I want to start to attach to what I have here, but I don't see it relating too well to my overall head size that I initially laid in. So sometimes that happens. Sometimes those initial lay-ins are just to give you something to attach to, and then you have to like reconfigure a lot of this stuff. Thinking about the corner of the mouth lining up pretty well. With the nostril, and also kind of triangulating from this point here. Typically our lower lips are set in a profile, they're kind of set in from our upper lips if we were to have a plumb line here, but depending on what we have going on with the pose, that might be different. So, to me, what's happening in my head right now is this is becoming the ugly stage of the drawing. This one in particular is battling me pretty well. So it's important to just stay calm and focused and keep pushing it, keep developing it, and stay really careful and slow and patient with all of these measurements, and then try to kind of snap back out into big picture mode when you can, because typically if we get kind of nervous about how a drawing's going, it's a lot easier to just focus on a detail of that drawing to kind of bring us comfort and confidence with it. Just say like, oh, the whole portrait is falling apart, let's go into this nose and really like render it and make it look pretty, but then it's going to be a nice looking nose that sits on a portrait that has no structure. So just keep that in mind, just stay patient and keep going with this. That's my goal here. Just keep trucking along. Alright, I want to place this hair shape. Thinking about also just roughly thinking about our cheek bone. talking about our distance, so finding kind of the hair shape now. Distance from the corner of the eye down to the edge of the eye socket here, and then this to hairline is probably closer to that. So what I'm hoping is that getting more of this big picture context in is going to help me feel better about the decisions I'm making with the overall proportions. So I'm feeling happier about this now. We're a little bit more confident, at least. Still a ways to go, but a lot of times if you feel like there's something off, it has a lot to do with surrounding information, big picture stuff. So I just try to stay the course and figure it out in time. Find a couple more kind of expressive marks for the hair. So here I go again, underestimating that piece. This area back here, this kind of these big shapes are the most underestimated. There's always not always, there is often a lot more volume on the backside of the head than you realize. The backside of the head is what I see the most cut off. even more back here. Trapezius coming down, shoulder, arm here. I just want these things to have, to lock in this a little bit easier. Floating heads are hard to know what's going on. Hard to know if it's okay or not. There's proportional stuff. So I like to kind of try to anchor everything to a neck, to a kind of top portion of our shoulders, the shoulder girdle. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to lay in a value. I'm not thinking about the hair at all. The hair is dark in its local color, but there are highlights and shadow shapes on it. Typically, for me, the hair is a later endeavor, or at least, at this stage, I still want to make sure the structure of things is there, so that's what my main priority here is. This is a little sloppy for the sake of time. I hope you all take a little bit more care into this. In fact, I'm gonna take a little bit and clean this up a little bit with the second wash. Okay, let's just take this a little bit further now. So I've toned this, I've kind of wiped it clear. Now I want to start again with the nose. Sharpen my pencil, it's very fresh and sharp now. Now I'm getting very precise here. This is where more refinement takes place. I'm still thinking of these shapes, and I have my kind of initial lay-in, but now I'm finding all the subtleties of these shapes. Lighter marks to indicate structure, but not big value, significant value changes within the actual image on the actual reference model. back. So I think what's important that I want to say here about this is I'm only able to make these more refining marks after all of this big picture is set and after I'm semi-confident. And I don't have to be totally confident with all these proportions, but I have to be semi-confident with the big picture to take it another step. What I see oftentimes is people put down barely anything and they jump into this level of refinement way too quickly. So I'm just here to emphasize this idea that you need to go slow and get all those first steps right before you can get to the fun stuff. This is where it becomes more of a satisfying and fulfilling kind of drawing experience when things really start to emerge. But again, it has to be, in order for it to be accurate and faithful to our reference, it has to come after a lot of this initial kind of setting in. Here I'm indicating those a little bit. I'm thinking about the thickness of our eyelids down on the bottom plane. We can see that a little bit more. In just a little bit. Not thinking about the pupil or iris information, really just seeing that there's kind of this darker line here, and then I guess the iris I am thinking about, but not the pupil, just the dark. There's just a dark shape here. On the other end, we can maybe hint the other eyelash, mystery eyelash over there. For the sake of big picture information, I'm kind of throwing this eyebrow into a shape, more or less. Hair there. I'll come over here. I do want to mostly just to show this cast shadow of the ear. To further help illustrate the light source. With ears, I don't actually want to get into this, so I'm going to probably just leave it there. But with ears, again, it's just a lot of careful observation. Ears are one of those things where there's not a ton of rules on. Every ear is a little different, so you really just have to look and kind of just make all of the ear information relate. I think what's more important when you're thinking of ears is the ear sits on the side of the face at an angle like this, and is typically, more tapered at the bottom than at the top, and just the ear location on the head in relation to, the bottom of the chin and the eyes, and in a profile, how they're kind of like a halfway point on the head as a whole. Another thing to watch out for, which I just corrected here, is we tend to make eyes too big. So be careful with that also. That's another pretty easy thing we fall into. When I'm thinking about the eyes, I will try to really strongly keep that in mind. is not making them too big. And then with eyelashes, don't draw the eyelashes. It's a detail that is unnecessary, especially at these kind of finish block end stages. Eyelashes is the very last thing you do when you're rendering a portrait, if it even needs it. If you look at old master paintings or master drawings, nobody's putting in eyelids. They're maybe indicating with a mark, but that's it. And that's all we really need as a viewer to know that there are eyelashes there. So eyelashes are kind of like the fingernail of the face. Few indications of highlights. This doesn't really show up very well on this paper. Okay. Alright guys, that's going to be it for portrait or head drawing. Thanks.